Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening and welcome to Alaska Weather for this Christmas Eve edition of the show. And to get started, we do have a winter weather advisory for snow in the Susitna Valley beginning tomorrow morning through tomorrow night, expecting anywhere from about 6 to 14 inches of snow, particularly west of the Parks Highway, but looks like it'll be a white Christmas up in that neck of the woods. And taking a look at our satellite imagery to see what's going on, we'll start with our satellite imagery over the North Pacific and the Bering Sea. And as we put the loop in motion, we can see this large area of low pressure that's been dominating the Bering Sea, rotating clouds and moisture on up into southwestern Alaska. You can also see this feed of moisture coming on up into the Gulf, and then yet another low pressure system south of the chain. This is going to produce some pretty strong winds as it comes in. The low pressure center that was over here by Shemya was producing some pretty strong winds today as well. And this was moving moisture in along the southwest coast, Bering Sea coast, Bristol Bay coast of Alaska. Now we'll take a look at the GOES satellite over the state of Alaska itself, and you can see that what's left of basically a frontal band that came into the Gulf of Alaska with the low basically in the northern Gulf. And what's happening is this disturbance aloft, the upper level of support for it in the trough, is moving through the area. And then we're going to see yet another wave of this coming through by tomorrow morning and into tomorrow evening. That's what's going to be producing the potential for snow across the south central region with particularly heavier amounts in that Susitna Valley area. Putting the loop in motion one more time, you can see this frontal boundary pushing towards southeast Alaska, clouds over the south central region as well as much of the interior, and with these clouds from the interior locations of the state, as you would normally expect, it's warmer conditions with that. So taking a look at our weather map for today, here's that system that was in the Gulf, the front that came through with the triple point low that formed basically down in the northern Gulf. The main parent low was over here by Nunivak Island, but really the main low that's supporting this whole thing is the low that is out into the western Bering Sea, this 963 millibar low. Anyway, you could see this, there's clouds that spread into southeast Alaska. There was some rain along the outer coastal areas. There was foggy and flurry type conditions over the Cook Inlet region today, and with this trough across the interior, this is where we were seeing some areas of light snow as well. Some snow showers were occurring in yet another trough that was pushing on up towards the Brooks Range, scattered snow shower activity there, and then generally cloudy conditions up along the Arctic coast. Now out to the Bering Sea with the main low pressure system itself, strong low pressure system out into the western Bering Sea and the western Aleutians, pretty strong winds associated with that, 40, 50 knot type winds there. This low pressure system that's pushing the front through the eastern Aleutians into the Alaska Peninsula, not quite as much of a wind maker, but it was spreading precipitation through those regions today. Taking a look now at the forecast for tonight, we have our main area of low pressure still remaining in the Bering Sea, trough extending into the northern Gulf of Alaska, right into southeast Alaska. Expect rain in the southern panhandle, a mixture of rain and snow as you get to the central panhandle with snow to the north. Snow along the North Gulf Coast, over the Kenai Peninsula, on up into the Susitna Valley. This will be the initial shot of snow overnight tonight. There'll be a break overnight towards the morning hours, and then it'll resume again tomorrow. Snow in the Bristol Bay area, snow in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, the Norton Sound region. All this, generally speaking, not very heavy snowfall, an inch or two at the most for most of these areas. Snow along this trough right on up into the eastern Brooks Range with some scattered snow showers over the eastern Arctic coast. Flurries with fog from Barrow west towards the northwest Arctic coast. Out into the Bering Sea, here's our big area of low pressure. It's not as well organized anymore. The lows are weakening. Still expect a pretty good shot of wind as this little low moves across the central Aleutian Islands, as well as a mixture of rain and snow showers in the central Aleutian Islands right on over to the eastern and Aleutians and the Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look now at the forecast for tomorrow, Christmas Day, we'll have our trough along the Coast, southeast Alaska. Rain in the southern Panhandle, a mixture of rain and snow in the central Panhandle with snow to the north. And all of this area is not going to see any real heavy precipitation, but you're likely to see precipitation with that trough. Along the North Gulf Coast, expecting some snowy conditions in the Prince William Sound area, the Cook Inlet region, although in the Cordova area, you're likely going to have some rain mixed in with that. Snow into the Copper River Basin, the Susitna Valley, as I said earlier, we are expecting snow advisory type conditions there, anywhere from 6 to 14 inches of snow tomorrow into tomorrow night. And with our trough extending on up along the Yukon River Valley into the upper Yukon Valley, expect areas of snow along that trough. Not a lot in the amount of accumulations, an inch or two is what we're expecting. Chance of snow along the Brooks Range as well as into the Arctic coast. And then out into the Bering Sea, we are expecting some mixed rain and snow showers across the Alaska Peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. And then yet another potent low pressure system is moving on up towards the western Aleutian Islands. Windy conditions with this low, a mixture of rain and snow as well. Taking a look now at the forecast for Friday. Weak low pressure in the eastern Gulf of Alaska. Basically, cloudy conditions, a chance or mixture of rain and snow likely. Rain likely in the southern Panhandle, a chance of rain and snow in the central Panhandle, with a chance of some snow up into the northern Panhandle. Along the North Gulf Coast towards the eastern portions of Prince William Sound by Cordova, expect some light rain and snow mix there. Chance of snow basically over the eastern interior right on down to the Bristol Bay region, where it's a chance of some snow showers or scattered snow showers. We will see this trough extending up the Yukon River Valley to the eastern Brooks Range, and along that trough expect some scattered snow showers for Friday. Chance of snow up along the Arctic coast in this weather pattern. And then we have yet another large, strong low pressure system in the western Bering Sea. The front will extend right on down through the eastern Aleutian Islands by Friday. Expect very windy conditions in advance of this front. Rain or a mixture of rain and snow as you move on up towards the Pribilof Islands, a mixture of rain and snow over the western Bering Sea as well as the western Aleutian Islands, as well as some very windy conditions are what you should expect with this storm for Friday. Taking a look now at temperatures around the state today in southeast Alaska, in the low 40s in the southern Panhandle to the mid 20s as we move on up towards the northern Panhandle. Mid 30s along the North Gulf Coast to low 30s. Upper 30s as we get on over towards the Kachemak Bay area to low 40s across Kodiak Island. In the 20s in the south central region, single digits in the Copper River Basin, single digits above and below zero in the eastern interior. Up into the Arctic coastal areas, basically right around zero for the majority of the Arctic coast, although about 7 degrees over towards Barter Island. Generally single digit temperatures across much of the northern interior, above and below zero. Over towards the Kotzebue Sound area, a bit cooler there in the minus teens, and then down into the Norton Sound region, temperatures about 10 above. And then as we move on over towards southwestern Alaska, temperatures in the teens over by Nunivak Island, up into the 20s and 30s in the Bristol Bay area to the 40s across the Alaska Peninsula, and then 30s across the Aleutian Islands as well as the Pribilof Islands where we're happening today. For your low temperatures tonight, expect your temperatures in southeast Alaska to be in the 20s in the northern Panhandle to the 30s to the south. Upper 20s along the North Gulf Coast to the mid to low 20s as we get into the south central region, to the teens as we move on up into the Susitna Valley. Below zero temperatures can be expected in the Copper River Basin as well as into the eastern interior, above and below zero in the single digits. Negative temperatures can be expected along the Brooks Range over towards the Seward Peninsula as well as all of the Arctic coast. Southwestern Alaska, teens to 20s are what you can expect, as well as temperatures into the 30s across the Alaska Peninsula and the Aleutian Islands and Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at our highs for tomorrow, expect temperatures in southeast Alaska to be in the 40s to the south, 30s to the north, 30s along the North Gulf Coast, particularly near Cordova, near freezing in much of Prince William Sound, low 40s over Kodiak Island, in the mid-20s to near 30 in the northern Cook Inlet to Susitna Valley region, in the teens to mid-20s over the eastern interior, single digits as we move on up towards the Brooks Range with below zero temperatures prevailing across the Arctic coast to the Kotzebue Sound area, 20s and 30s as we move over towards the Bering Sea coast to the low 40s across the Alaska Peninsula as well as the eastern and central Aleutian Islands with temperatures in the upper 30s in the Pribilof Islands. Taking a look at flying weather for tomorrow. It's going to be pretty messy tomorrow for flying. Marginal conditions throughout much of southeast Alaska to IFR conditions in the northern panhandle, IFR conditions along the North Gulf Coast, the Talkeetna Mountains, the Alaska Range, and the Wrangell Mountains, IFR conditions across the Killbuck Mountains into the Kuskokwim Mountains, IFR conditions across the basically the Brooks Range, the eastern 2/3 of the Brooks Range, marginal conditions up along the eastern half of the Arctic coast, marginal conditions across the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutian Islands, as well as the majority of the Bering Sea, with some IFR conditions out in the western Aleutian Islands. Taking a look at our passes for tomorrow, expect marginal to IFR conditions for Anik-Tuvik Pass with IFR conditions for Adigan Pass. Down to the Alaska Range, expect IFR conditions for both Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, with IFR conditions also expected for Rainy Pass, IFR conditions for Windy Pass, with IFR conditions for Isabel Pass as well as Mentasta Pass, and also expect IFR conditions as we move on down towards the Chugach Mountains in Ta-Anita Pass as well as Portage Pass. And then moving on over to southeast Alaska, expect IFR conditions as well tomorrow for both Chilkoot and White Pass. Taking a look at our freezing levels tomorrow, basically at the surface for the mainland portion of the state, surface to about 2,000 feet in southeast Alaska, and right around 1,000 feet across the majority of the Aleutian Islands to about 2,000 feet over the central Aleutian Islands. For our icing tomorrow, expect some isolated moderate rime or mixed icing in southeast Alaska from your freezing level to 15,000 feet. Isolated moderate rime icing over much of the interior regions of the state down into the south central region from the freezing level to 8,000 feet. Some isolated moderate rime icing in the eastern Bering Sea and the Alaska Peninsula, eastern Aleutian Islands, freezing level to 12,000 feet, with occasional moderate rime or mixed icing from your freezing level to 12,000 feet over the central to western Aleutian Islands. For our jet stream tomorrow, it starts off at about 185 knots coming off of Japan, tapers off to 90 knots across the central Aleutian Islands to 85 knots south of the Alaska Peninsula, 85 knots coming on up into the Gulf of Alaska, and then right down along the west coast of North America around 80 knots. Down to the 9,000 foot level, generally about 20 to 30 knot winds across much of the south central region and the interior, 15 to 20 knots over the northwest Arctic coast, 30 to 35 knots in southeast Alaska with about 35 knot winds over the Alaska Peninsula. Stronger winds right around our main low pressure system, basically upwards of about 50 to 55 knots around that low pressure system. Down to the 3,000 foot level, again, very strong winds right around that low pressure system, around 60 to 65 knots, 35 to 40 knots across the Aleutian Islands to the Alaska Peninsula, about 30 knots coming across Kodiak Island, lighter winds over the mainland, 25 knots along the North Gulf Coast. And then for our turbulence tomorrow, basically the turbulence will be mainly out in the from Kodiak Island west, isolated moderate below 3,000 feet across the Alaska Peninsula with some widespread moderate turbulence below 3,000 feet over the western Aleutian Islands. That wraps up this portion of the show. Enjoy the segment and come back to the marine forecast.
Welcome back, everyone, to part 2 of lake effect snow showers in Alaska. I have Eric Stevens with me again here in the studio, and we're going to pick up where we left off last time, and let's kind of reintroduce some of the lake effect snow shower facts that you devolved last time. Just refresh our memories a little bit about lake effect snow showers.
Okay, lake effect snow showers are potentially heavy bursts of snow that are caused when cold air in the wintertime moves over an open body of water. The open body of water, like one of the Great Lakes in the lower 48, or say an ocean near Alaska, provides the cold air with a low-level source of moisture and heat. Heat is required to get an overturning of the atmosphere because warm air will want to rise. And by heat, too, we don't have to say 80-degree water, just simply water that is warmer than the air above it. In Alaska here, or even in the Great Lakes area in the wintertime, there's ample cold air. When that flows over the water, heat and moisture will boil up from the surface of the lake, creating convective clouds, kind of like a summertime shower or even a thunder shower, that kind of process. And we get convective snow showers that can be blown ashore by the ambient background wind pattern. That's lake effect snow. Some places in the lower 48 that are famous for getting this include Buffalo, New York, or Michigan's Upper Peninsula there.
Right. Well, you mentioned a bit about Alaska in your last response. This is a great segue into my next question, which is, do we have lake effect snow showers here in Alaska?
Well, in the sense of the Great Lakes, maybe technically we don't because Alaska doesn't have the Great Lakes in it, but the physical processes are the same for the oceans around Alaska. Maybe you would want to call it ocean effect snow showers, but just the nomenclature of the sciences called it lake effect. The idea is the same though, open water supplying heat and moisture to the atmosphere resulting in snow showers in the wintertime. In Alaska, this can happen in the first half of the winter especially, or even the early fall, because the requirement is open water. When the sea ice starts to come down, that effectively seals the lid on the ocean and deprives the atmosphere of the needed flux of heat and moisture into it. And my perspective, I come from northern Alaska there, from Fairbanks and the Nome area, and my expertise or my experience is up in that area. You had mentioned before that we can see these kind of striations of clouds, bands of clouds moving with the wind down by the Alaska Peninsula. It also happens further north. Just a week or two ago up in the Barrow area, they were having snow showers. They weren't getting a foot of snow out of it, but there were a few bursts of briefly heavy snow. Classic snow shower environment, ocean effect snow showers, if you will.
And the ice is obviously not along the Arctic coastline right now. It is open water, so it was the lake effect snow showers up here were present at that time because the ice edge is still far to the north and to the east, correct?
Yes, this is the time of year. If Barrow wants to get the ocean effect snow showers, it's got to do it in the early part of the winter. Once the ice is there, it's sealed off.
You did some work on a case study that affected the Seward Peninsula. I believe it was back in October of 2000. And this background information about lake effect snow showers kind of leading up to this. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, the Seward Peninsula snow event and what was going on there and how that tied in to this quote-unquote lake effect snow shower.
Right. Well, in October of 2000, we actually saw a combination of some very weak classic weather forcing mechanisms, the weather fronts that we see on a map. There was an old, decaying, occluded front hanging around western Alaska. This front by itself was very weak, could not produce much weather to speak of, but it managed to tap in to some lake effect mechanisms over the open water of the northeastern Bering Sea and to produce some locally heavy snow showers.
And this image that we are going to show up here on the screen right now, this is a satellite image of that particular event back in October 2000. And first we have this nice big picture of the state, and we see this big area of low pressure barreling on into the North Gulf coastline. But over the Seward Peninsula, there's a nice little band of clouds going moving over the area there, and
That's right.
that is the lake effect snow shower event that we're talking about. Is that correct?
That's the area we want to focus on. And when you first look at this image, the first thing that grabs your eye is that big corkscrew there along the North Gulf coast. But lake effect snow showers are pretty subtle in their spatial extent. They can be just little things. They don't really grab the eye from a satellite point of view as the first thing. But when we zoom in, we'll see that they're more prominent. On this image, we can kind of see from St. Matthew Island curving up northeastward toward the Seward Peninsula, there's a line of showers that gets more intense as we get toward the Seward Peninsula. That's the area right where that old weather front was decaying, but it was also grabbing onto some lake effect mechanisms.
Okay, and let's zoom in a little bit closer. And this next image gives you a really good idea of what was occurring that day. Boy, it's sure looks like lake effect snow showers to me.
Oh gosh, that's a beautiful picture.
Yeah. What's going on here?
Well, what we've got now, this picture was actually taken at night. It's an infrared satellite image of the Yukon Delta, Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island area. And we've got a string of snow showers extending from the lower left side of the picture, moving up to the right, and then heading for the western tip of the Seward Peninsula. Now, it just so happens that there was a weak boundary, that old decaying front was right along that line. You can find it, just connect the dots there. And also, though, the ambient background wind pattern was blowing parallel to this boundary from the southwest up to the northeast and then straight north into the Seward Peninsula, just following the line of those snow showers there. These snow showers were driven by the classic mechanism of cold air over open water. It was the exact time of year that Alaska can see these kind of snow showers, it was in October of 2000, before the sea ice had covered up this entire area.
So in this event here, we have the essential elements of lake effect snow showers. We have the warmer air, and then the colder wind blowing over. We have the warmer water.
Yes.
And we have the colder wind blowing over the water. So we have those two things.
Yes.
And we also have some sort of a frontal kind of dynamic going on there too. So that kind of added into this. Right. This particular case.
Definitely, it was teamwork, and the sum is greater than the individual parts.
Well, how much snow did some of these people get out on the Seward Peninsula?
Well, in that sense, this was also a lake effect kind of event in that you didn't have to go very far to have very different snow totals. At Port Clarence, 6 inches of snow over about 12 hours. In Teller, the village of Teller, 12 inches of snow in 12 hours, a foot of snow in half a day. And in Nome, not very far away, an inch and a half of snow. Hardly anything by comparison. And that's the way it is. Just like on the satellite picture, you can see you don't have to go very far before you're in or out of that snow. And that's something else I should mention too about the spatial variability. These snow showers, be they driven by a lake or by the ocean here in Alaska, when they're blown ashore, they don't last long once they get away from the source of their nourishment from that open water. And so they blow inland, and then they just snow themselves out of existence, and they fade out. So parts of Alaska that could see a lake effect snow shower are then by definition the coastal areas. Interior Alaska will not have this mechanism at play.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Well, I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm glad we had you in the studio today to talk about this, because this is obviously a real weather scenario that can occur up here in Alaska. So if folks are out there along the coastline and they see something like this on a satellite image, and you can get that on the internet real easily today, they'll maybe say, hey, I remember that lake effect snow shower segment that Eric Stevens talked about.
Snow showers happen here.
Yes, they do. Well, thank you for coming into the studio today, and I thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you again next time.
Welcome back, and now let's take a look at our marine forecast for southeast Alaska for Thursday. We're expecting basically westerly winds 20 knots in the southern outside waters right on up to the East Gulf Coast, where the winds will be about 25 knots. Southern inside waters, southwest to southeast winds about 20 knots, and then up in the Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay area, your typical northerly winds for this time of year, 10 to 15 knots. By Friday, we'll actually see the winds becoming a little bit more southerly up in the Lynn Canal and Glacier Bay area. Light and variable in the southern panhandle and the inside waters, with winds out of the west to northwest about 20 knots in the outside waters right on up to the East Gulf Coast. Taking a look now at the south central region for Thursday. Expect southwest winds across the entire area, 30-knot winds across Kodiak Island, at least on the south side and east of the Barren Islands and along the North Gulf Coast. 25-knot winds from Chillicothe Strait right on up into the Cook Inlet region, with 20-knot southwesterly winds in the northern Cook Inlet region and 20-knot winds out of the southwest in Prince William Sound. By Friday, expect the winds to remain southwest in the Cook Inlet region right on down to the Chillicothe Strait area, about 10 to 15 knots. West winds 20 to 25 knots from east of the Barren Islands to south of Kodiak Island. West winds 20 knots along the North Gulf Coast, with winds becoming light and variable around 10 knots in Prince William Sound. Taking a look at the Alaska Peninsula for Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the southwest across the entire region, about 35 to 40 knot winds over the western Alaska Peninsula waters, 45 knot winds in Bristol Bay out of the southwest, with 35 knot winds south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula. Taking a look at the area for Friday, expect your winds to become more south-southeast, 35 knot winds south of the western Alaska Peninsula to 30 knots on the north side of the peninsula. Southeast winds 25 knots in that Bristol Bay area, with south winds 25 knots south of the eastern Alaska Peninsula. For your Aleutian Islands on Thursday, expect your winds to be southwest about 40 to 45 knots from Adak over to the Nikolsky area, with 40 knot winds in the eastern Aleutian Islands near Alaska out of the southwest as well. In the western Aleutian Islands, expect your winds to be out of the south to east about 35 to 45 knots. Taking a look at the, the forecast there for Friday. Expect your winds to be out of the south-southwest about 40 to 50 knots over the western Aleutian Islands, with winds out of the south to southwest about 30 knots from Adak to Atka. Southwest 40 to 45 knots in the Nikolsky area, with 40 knot southwesterly winds over the eastern Aleutian Islands near Unalaska. For your Bering Sea coastal waters on Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the southwest about 35 knots in the Pribilof Islands to south winds 30 knots outside of Kuskokwim Bay. Then northeast winds basically over the St. Lawrence to St. Matthew Island region and on the north side of the Nunivak Island area about 25 to 30 knots. For Friday, expect your winds to remain northeasterly to easterly north of the Nunivak Island area to the St. Lawrence Island region around 30 knots. South winds 25 knots outside of Kuskokwim Bay with 35 knot south winds in the Pribilof Islands, and then southeast winds about 45 knots in that St. Matthew Island region. Taking a look at the Arctic coastal waters for Thursday, expect your winds to be out of the northeast about 10 to 15 knots all the way from Kaktovik to Barrow. Northeast winds 20 to 25 knots coming down along the northwest Arctic coast with north winds 30 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound. On Friday, northeast winds over the entire region, 25 knots outside of Kotzebue Sound to Cape Lisburne, 15 to 20 knots from Barrow down to Point Lay, with 10 to 15 knots from Prudhoe Bay over towards Kaktovik. And for a recap again for tonight, we do have a winter weather advisory for snow in the Susitna Valley for tomorrow morning into tomorrow evening, anywhere from about 6 to 14 inches there. Expect basically snow over much of the southwestern portion of the state overnight tonight on up into the interior, with a mixture of rain and snow across the Alaska Peninsula and some rain and snow in southeast Alaska. By tomorrow, the snow will be spreading across the south central region into the Copper River Basin, as well as portions of the central interior, and a mixture of rain and snow from Cordova east into the central Panhandle, and some mixed rain and snow showers across the Alaska Peninsula, as well as the Aleutian Islands, eastern Aleutian Islands to the western Aleutian Islands. But we're at a time for the show this evening. Thank you for watching and have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
It's never too early to set expectations and goals for your child's education. The UA College Savings Plan provides opportunities that can help you reach your educational savings goals. Save in Alaska. Study anywhere. There is more information available by calling 1-888, the number 4, and then Alaska. This message sponsored by the UA College Savings Plan.